Oh, you're back. I didn't even hear you come in. We've already got the fire going. Pull up a seat. We're about to open the Insidious agenda once again. The stage couldn't be more perfectly set, for it's Halloween, and our story this week is truly terrifying. For this story was the inspiration behind William Peter Blatty's classic book and William Friedkin's movie. It is The Exorcism of Roland Doe, the story that inspired The Exorcist. This week's story is centered on the demonic affliction of a 13-year-old boy named Roland Edwin Hunkler. Throughout our retelling of these events, we'll refer to him as the newspapers did, using the pseudonym of Roland Doe. Alternatively, the papers would also give him another pseudonym of Robbie Mannheim. Roland was born He was born on the 1st of June in 1935, and his family, at the time, lived at 3807 40th Street in Cottage City, Maryland. His parents were Edwin Hunkler and Odell Coppage. Roland was an only child and struggled a fair bit with making friends. Thus, he would spend much of his youth in the company of adults, heavily relying on them for entertainment and friendship. The closest of these friends was his aunt, a lady named Harriet. From a young age, Roland had been exposed to paranormal events and was exposed to different occult practices. His aunt was a proclaimed spiritualist of movement that was popularized through the use of figures like Maggie and Kate Fox. One of the things his aunt taught him was how to channel through the use of a spirit board, commonly known to most by the brand name Ouija. On his 13th birthday, Roland asked his Aunt Harriet for his own Ouija board, a request which she bought and would give him as a gift. Sometime in early January of 1949, or in the weeks preceding it, Roland's Aunt Harriet would pass away. It was believed that because of her lessons, he was able to use the spirit board on his own, and even made efforts to do so. It was through this experimentation and practice that he was believed to have invited something in. One of the reasons for the attraction of dark spirits, normally in the form of poltergeists, is through young, often teenage girls. These spirits are drawn to the incredibly strong emotional energy they often exude. With Roland's case, and given his extremely close relationship with his aunt, it was highly likely that this spirit was drawn to Roland's sadness and wanted to feed off of that energy. This would present as highly likely, as no phenomena presented itself until Roland's aunt passed away. So either one of two things happened. His Aunt Harriet was very well versed in the use of a spirit board. Thus, she was able to recognize when not so nice spirits came through and was able to contain them through shutting the board down. Roland, either by virtue of naivety, not having enough practice, or simply having an energy too great to contain, invited something in that he wasn't ready for. In the simplest of terms, Roland opened a door that he couldn't close. The initial phenomena would be considered normal across many different hauntings when you put it in perspective. Scratching sounds would be heard from the walls and floors coming from Roland's room. Water was found dripping from pipes and walls, and his mattress would move and shake on its own. Roland's mother believed that these noises and early phenomena were actually the spirit of Aunt Harriet attempting to contact the family, or more specifically, Roland himself. In the Exorcist film, the belief that this was the spirit of the deceased Aunt Harriet can be seen in Reagan's imaginary friend, Captain Howdy, earlier in the film. Around the home, furniture would move on its own, and objects that were of a lighter nature, like vases, could be seen levitating in the presence of Roland. In an attempt to get the behavior to cease, Roland's family would make attempts to contact these spirits and requested to be left alone. They hoped to reason with the spirits so they would no longer be disturbed by their presence. Unfortunately, the simple ask did not remedy the restless spirit phenomena, and it would continue, and soon would come to get much worse. The spirit attacks began to target Roland directly, moving the haunting from the stage of infestation to oppression. He complained that sometimes he could hear someone walking around his room when he tried to sleep. Claw and scratch marks could soon be found on Roland's mattress, and eventually, his family even began to find those physical marks on Roland's body. This alarmed his parents, who, not knowing what else they could do, turned to the religion and their minister. Their minister was Luther Miles Schulze. Reverend Schulze had a genuine interest in the subject matter of parapsychology and would make arrangements with the family for Roland to visit his residence where he could more closely observe him. Schulze would witness some of the same phenomena that were exhibited in the family home, such as the moving of furniture and the levitating of objects. When the case crossed the ears of another parapsychologist named Joseph Rhine, he believed that Reverend Schulze had subconsciously embellished some of the facts during his observations. Nonetheless, Schulze would eventually let the family know they should take Roland to see a Catholic priest. The family would also consult with doctors and psychiatrists who were not able to find an explanation for what was affecting Roland. They exhausted every possibility they could within the medical community before turning to the Catholics. The entire family wanted to do anything they could for Roland and converted from Lutheranism to Catholicism. The first thing they attempted was to have Roland baptized. The attempt was met with rejection from Roland in the form of spasms, fits, and absolute rage. The conversion and follow-on baptism attempt did nothing to remedy this affliction, so they did the next best thing they thought they could do, which would unknowingly solve nothing. They attempted to move houses. The family wouldn't have outrightly known that inhuman spirits afflict people, not places. Their situation was far from a haunted house and was more of a demonic attack. But having never dealt with this, they're hardly at fault for trying anything that they could. And of course, this doesn't outrightly mean that demonic entities can't inhabit certain places, which they can, so long as there is some form of negative or emotionally connected energy for them to feed off of. Being newly Catholic, Roland's family had become acquainted with its specific practices and rites. As there was nothing further they could do, their next attempt was to request an exorcism be performed on their son. The family made contact with their local priest, Father Albert Hughes. Father Hughes would request permission from the church to perform an exorcism on Roland. The request was granted, and the exorcism was performed in February of 1949 at Georgetown University Hospital, a hospital that, at the time, was under the religious care of the Jesuits. During the rites proceedings, Roland had to be strapped down to his mattress to prevent him from lashing out before Father Hughes. Roland would start lashing out, even only as Father Hughes was beginning the rite of exorcism. The procedure progressed up to the point that Roland was able to break off one of the mattress springs and was able to slash Father Hughes across the shoulder. Because of the injury, the party was forced to abandon the ritual, leaving it incomplete. As would be expected, the attempt only enraged whatever was tormenting Roland. Scratches began appearing more frequently on his body. During one of these attacks, the word Louis, spelt out Louis, was clawed into the boy's body. The family had a feeling this was pointing to St. Louis in Missouri, as they had family there. They would depart, still desperate for a way to save Roland and win the battle for his soul. When they arrived in St. Louis, the family was fortunate to have a relative that attended the University of St. Louis. This relative would contact one of their professors, who put the family in touch with Father William Bowdern. Father Bowdern was part of a special sect within the Catholic Church known as the Society of Jesus. More commonly, this society is known as the Jesuits. As this organization has come up a few times throughout certain episodes, I wanted to explain a bit more about who they are. Reaching all the way back to the reign of Pope Paul II in 1540 is where we find the founding of the Jesuit order. They originally performed duties similar to that of missionaries in over 112 different countries. Mostly, their work centers on education, research, and cultural pursuits, spreading the word of God. They operate under the blessing of Madonna della Strada, which was one of the titles of the Virgin Mary, and they are led by a person with the title Superior General, with their headquarters being in Rome. The Jesuits, at any time, are subject to orders to travel anywhere in the world and could be subject to living in extreme conditions. Their founder, Ignatius of Loyola, had a military background, so the concepts of rapid deployability and austere conditions were familiar to him. Even their motto is powerful: whoever desires to serve as a soldier of God, to strive especially for the defense and propagation of the faith, and for the progress of souls in the Christian life and doctrine. Because of this, they have often been referred to as God's soldiers, or the order will sometimes use the nickname, the Company. Much more can be learned about this society, which we'll get into in a future episode. After consulting with the university president, Father Bowdern would agree to examine the boy. Plans were put in place, leading to the arrival of the priest at the boy's home on Roanoke Drive in early March of 1949. Father Bowdern would witness some of the same phenomena the family had reported, namely the physical harm being done to the boy in addition to the violent behavior. A key thing to remember was that the family was now in St. Louis, experiencing the same phenomena while the original things were happening in Maryland. This was a difference of about 825 miles in difference. Father Bowdern also made note of some behavioral changes in Roland. Roland would appear as his normal self during the day, albeit it may have been just a possible portrayal of his normal behaviors. But at night, shortly after settling into bed, he would erupt into screaming and violent outbursts. Father Bowdern also noticed that Roland exhibited some of the other symptoms of demonic possession, such as the ability to enter a trance-like state, to speak in tongues, to change his voice, as well as a strong aversion to religious objects. If we think back on the case of Anneliese Michel and her afflictions with demonic possession, you can draw a lot of similarities between the two behaviors. Father Bowdern would bring his evidence to the Archbishop, who granted permission, for now, the second exorcism to be performed. The second exorcism was set to take place at the Alexian Brothers Hospital, now known as South City Hospital in St. Louis. Before he began the rite, Father Bowdern would summon another Jesuit priest who worked at the hospital, Father Walter Halloran, to the psychiatric wing where they were set up and asked him to assist in the exorcism. Also assisting Bowdern and Halloran were two other Jesuit priests named William Van Roo and Raymond Bishop, the latter of which would write about his experiences in the exorcism. As the exorcism was set to begin, that would eventually last weeks, Father Bowdern made note of many different events that transpired. Much of what was said eventually would end up in William Peter Blatty's book that affected a possessed Reagan. But there are some things that didn't. Frequently, the letter X would appear on Roland's chest, which was symbolic of the number 10. This possibly inferred that his demonic affliction was from 10 demons, not one. A pitchfork-shaped pattern also appeared in Roland's skin. Before the eyes of the priests, this moved from the boy's thigh down to his ankle. The priests never gave up, engaging in battle with the demonic presence night after night for weeks on end. The rituals would eventually take an unhealthy turn on the 20th of March after Roland urinated in his bed and began shouting obscenities at the priests. It's important to note that unlike Anneliese Michel, Roland Doe was treated by medical professionals. After it was determined he became medically unfit to continue. A breakthrough, or miracle, would occur on the 18th of April, Easter Monday, in the boy's hospital room. Roland awoke to seizures and screamed at the priests that Satan would always be with them. The priests would counter this with weapons of their own. Holy relics, such as crucifixes, medals, and rosaries were all laid across Roland's body. As the evening progressed, at around 10:45 p.m., the priests invoked the name and the power of Saint Michael the Archangel. They would beseech Saint Michael to drive Satan from Roland's body. They shouted back at the demon, saying that Saint Michael would battle them for the boy's soul. Locked in a battle with this demonic entity were Fathers Bowdern and Halloran, and through divine intervention, the Archangel Saint Michael. When after 7 minutes, everything subsided and went quiet, Roland would awake from his trance, sit up, and he said 2 words. He's gone. He had absolutely no memory or recollection of any of the events that transpired. The one thing Roland did know, and he conveyed this to the priests, was that he had a vision of Saint Michael vanquishing Satan on a great battlefield. I just want to pause for a moment to let that sink in and let the picture play out in your mind, to realize how powerful the invocation truly was, and at least in Roland Doe's eyes, that divine intervention is real, and he was saved by the greatest archangel of all. After this, all the demonic possessive behavior and strange occurrences ceased. Roland went on to live a normal life. He was very brilliant intellectually and had a successful career as a rocket scientist for the National Aeronautics and Space Agency, or NASA. He was a patent holder and even helped to create the technology that would make space shuttle panels resistant to extreme heat. Much of Roland's handiwork even went to space on the Apollo missions in the 1960s. Roland always wanted to live a secret life, always in fear that his coworkers would find out about his past. He would even take trips away from his home around Halloween for fear that he may be harassed. Roland retired after a career with NASA in 2001, serving with them for almost 40 years. The remainder of his life was quiet and peaceful until his passing away from a stroke in 2020, just a month shy of his 86th birthday. Before we get into the parts of our episode about the Exorcist book and movie, let's examine the 1993 book, Possessed, the true story of an exorcism, a book that was authored by Thomas Allen and is believed to be the consensus choice for what truly happened. In the book, Allen's beliefs and evidence tend to point to Roland Doe suffering from various mental disorders, believing that he was just a deeply disturbed boy, nothing supernatural about him. Another author, Mark Opasnik, also disputes the supernatural claims and goes on to state that Roland was a spoiled, disturbed bully who threw deliberate tantrums to get attention from adults and get out of school. From his findings, Opasnik would state that Father Halloran never actually heard the boy's voice change. The other tongue he spoke, Opasnik says, was actually just Roland mimicking the Latin phrases that the priests were reciting and did not innately possess or inherit the ability to speak a second language. The boy's fingernails were also not examined when various injuries were found on his body. Roland's exorcism, unlike Anneliese's, was not recorded. Thus, there is no evidence, and everything presented is pure hearsay. There also exists no record that Roland was admitted to Georgetown Hospital, or that any exorcism was ever. From some of Roland's neighbors, Opasnik was able to discern that Roland was a clever trickster who normally pulled pranks to frighten his mother and fool other children in the neighborhood. One key thing that Opasnik lays out is his belief that those who were directly involved with the exorcism process were influenced by their own specializations, saying the following. To psychiatrists, Roland Doe suffered from mental illness. To priests, this was a case of demonic possession. To writers and film and video producers, this was a great story, which they could exploit for profit. Those involved saw what they were trained to see. Each purported to look at the facts, but just the opposite was true. In actuality, they manipulated the facts and emphasized information that fit their own agendas. Like the majority of paranormal cases that are related to demonic possession and subsequent exorcisms, there are a lot of points for and against. We'll never really know for sure what afflicted Roland Doe, but this case certainly represents well for the belief in demonic possession and for divine intervention. In the words of the man who wrote The Exorcist, William Peter Blatty, we'll close with the following. You don't blame us for being here, do you? After all, we have no place to go, no home. Incidentally, what an excellent day for an exorcism. If you're hearing this message, that means you made it to the end of our final special episode as we close out Spooky Season 2022. I really hope you enjoyed not only this episode, but the entire slate of episodes we put out this month. I'm really excited for the direction of where our podcast is going, and I have still many amazing stories to tell, which is why I'll get you to come back again tomorrow for our regular Tuesday episode. This week's episode will be the second iteration in our Folklore Appendices series for all of you cryptid lovers, where we're going to cover the stories of the Black Shuck and the Wendigo. New episodes are released every Tuesday at 5 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. But for now, it's time to close the cover of the Insidious agenda. I'll see you again next week, and thanks for coming.